Welcome to part 4 of the FOG Napoleonic series. In this episode we'll cover the assault phase. So what's the sequence for assaults? The active player needs to declare all assaults up front, including taking any required CMTs. Once that's done, the non-active player then declares their responses, which would be potentially intercept moves. Wavering units that have been assaulted would have to take a cohesion test, and then other charge responses. The active player then moves assaulting units into contact in any order that he chooses, and finally the non-active player conducts defensive fire, and this would include the assaulter potentially taking tests and outcome moves as a response to that defensive fire. And it's worth noting that combat will only occur actually towards the end of the turn, so the assault sequence is more about moving and firing. Combat will happen later in the turn. So who can and can't assault? So to be able to assault, you have to be able to see your target, quite obviously. So if you're behind a hill, for example, and out of visibility range, you can't charge over a hill of troops you can't see. The unit charging must be able to reach the target. Assaults can be conditional on friends moving out the way. So if the unit in front of you itself is going to charge and will create space for you to then assault, then that's possible. And sometimes an assault will require a CMT. Any assault that interpenetrates friends requires a CMT. If the assaulting unit is spent, so in the case of cavalry, that would require a CMT. And if you're out of command range of your general, of your divisional general, you would need to take a CMT, and obviously that would require 2 command points as described in one of the earlier videos. And then finally, if infantry want to assault an enemy unit at the same time as a friendly cavalry unit wants to assault the enemy, then the infantry need to take a CMT. So who can't assault? So waverers. Wavering units are not allowed to declare assaults. Cavalry cannot assault infantry if the infantry are in difficult terrain, or if the infantry are in buildings or in redoubts. Infantry cannot assault non-wavering cavalry in turn, so unless the cavalry are irregular light cavalry skirmish, so Cossacks, or if the infantry if the cavalry are in buildings or in difficult, then the infantry can charge them. Irregular light infantry can only assault other irregular light infantry, and then irregular light cavalry skirmish, they need a complex move test to assault a non-wavering enemy frontally. So they're good if they get behind your flank, but they need to test if they want to charge enemy frontally. So wheeling and sliding in an assault. Units can wheel or slide in the assault phase to get into contact. So here's an example where A is trying to charge T. So step 1 is when you declare an assault, you have to wheel at the start of the assault move. So A has now wheeled just enough to place some part of T in front of their center. A will, as you can see in the diagram, they need to shift slightly to avoid clipping the corner of the friendly unit B. So step 2, A has moved into contact with T and has slid by the minimum necessary to avoid B. A could also have slid if instead of B being a unit it was blocking terrain or a table edge, but it couldn't slide to avoid an enemy unit. And you can only slide up to 1 base width, so if you need to slide more than that, then you wouldn't be allowed to make the move. What are the possible responses to an assault? Infantry, except irregular lights, their first option is to stand and give defensive fire, or without giving defensive fire they can change formation, so in this case form square. So if you're charged by cavalry, you might want to form square and not give fire. Or if you were in square and you're being charged by infantry, you could come out of square. Those are your choices, but if you wanted to give defensive fire, then you would stay in the formation you're in and take your chances in that formation and give defensive fire. The other thing they can do is, if they're not the target of the assault themselves, they could intercept charge. Irregular light infantry have fewer options. They can pretty much stand and give defensive fire, so they're not allowed to form square. So you wouldn't want them to be caught in the open by cavalry. Irregular light cavalry skirmish, Cossacks, they can countercharge if they're being charged by other irregular light cavalry skirmish, or if they pass a complex move test. They can also evade, one of the few troop types who are allowed to evade. Other cavalry, they countercharge, is their most common thing if they're charged by cavalry. They can stand if they are wavering or if they're charged in the flank or rear, or they can intercept charge. Unlimbered artillery, they need to take a CMT when they are charged by anybody, and the CMT is to stand and give defensive fire. Alternatively, they can voluntarily abandon guns and not take the complex move test, but voluntarily abandon guns, or they would abandon guns if they took the CMT but failed. However, they can only abandon the guns, or the guns only count as abandoned if they had a steady or disordered infantry unit within 2 MU from them. The abandoning guns represents the gunners running off to the cover of the nearest infantry, but if infantry are too far away, the gunners are assumed to be cut down, so if there's no infantry close enough, then the guns will count as broken. What if limbered artillery are charged? Well, they'd be broken on contact if the charge came from within 6 MU. Otherwise, they could evade, so that's the only other time a unit can evade. Limbered artillery charged from beyond 6 MU. How do countercharges work? So cavalry must countercharge, as I've mentioned, they must countercharge the assaulting cavalry if they are charged frontally only, unless they are wavering. If they charged partly from the front and partly from behind flank, they would stand and receive the charge, or if they were wavering, they would stand and receive the charge. So let's play that through. So A has assaulted T, both are cavalry units. A doesn't need to wheel because part of T is directly to the front of their middle, but T does need to wheel to meet the charge. So how does T do that? So here you can see T has wheeled to line up parallel with A. You measure the distance between the two of them based on where they started before the wheel. So in this case it was 7 MU, and that's important to know where they meet in the middle. So step 2 and 3, so T moves forward half the distance between themselves and the assaulting unit, or 4 MU, whichever is the shortest distance. And then step 3, the assaulters move and into contact with the unit who's countercharged them. Intercept moves. So a unit that hasn't been assaulted may attempt to intercept assaulting enemy units. The distance for this is 4 MU for cavalry and 2 MU for infantry. So here in the example, A has declared a charge on T, and if nothing happens, if X doesn't intercept, then A would contact T as shown in the diagram. However, as you can see, X's intercepting zone goes across the path of A's assault assault path, and so X could choose to intercept. But it needs to take a complex move test to do this. So in the third image here, you can see X has passed its CMT and has moved to intercept A. It doesn't have to move its full 4 MU, it can choose to move slightly less if it wants to. T is no longer the target of the assault, so it doesn't have to make any responses. So if T, for example, was wavering, they wouldn't need to take a cohesion test for that. And then the last step in the sequence is A can now move into contact with intercepting unit X. And in this case, even though X is cavalry and A is infantry, A wouldn't be able to form square, so it can be quite dangerous if infantry allow themselves to be intercepted by cavalry. So what happens if all your targets that you've assaulted move away for some reason? And this could be because the target has evaded or potentially routed, or if you charged guns and they had abandoned guns. So here we have A has declared a charge on R. R routes and out of range of the assault. So what are A's options? So if A was an impetuous unit, they would have to continue straight forward. They have no other option. They have to just do their full charge move straight ahead and move up to point A2. If A wasn't impetuous, they could choose to deviate 2 MU to either side of the path of charge. So in this case, they could deviate into S because S is within 2 MU of straight ahead, and also S is the nearest unit in arc. They could also just decide S is too hard a proposition and they could just continue straight ahead and end at point A2. They can't assault unit unit U, because unit U is outside of that 2mu arc. And they also can't assault T, because even though they're in that 2mu width, they are not the nearest unit. And then finally, let's get into defensive fire. So X has declared an assault on B and has moved into contact. How does defensive fire against X work? In this example, X would receive defensive fire from the target of the assault, being B, because the charge wasn't from behind B's flank or rear. If somehow X had managed to start the assault from behind flank, then B wouldn't get a chance to give any defensive fire. But what other fire will X receive? So X will receive defensive fire from all enemy units whose support area they move through. And the support area is defined as one base width to either side of a unit and 2mu, so close range in front of the unit. So in this example, you can see X would receive defensive fire not only from B, the target, but from D and from E, whose support area X has moved through. Even though it has ended outside of their support area, at some point on the move it was in those support areas. In addition, X will receive support fire from unit C, because they've ended in their support area, but they wouldn't receive any from A, because even though A is right next to B, because of where X has impacted B, it's outside of A's support area. In terms of dice, what dice would everyone receive? So B, being the target of the charge, get their full dice. So a small unit at close range gets 4 dice. D is a small unit, or is an infantry unit but with no artillery, so they only get 1 dice, while E and C both have either artillery units or have an artillery attachment, so they get 2 support dice. And of course A is out of arc, so gets no dice. And all support dice, whether from behind flank, whether from artillery or from infantry, all will be hitting on 4s, ignoring other POAs, which we'll talk about under firing. So that's it for the assault phase. Next episode, we'll talk all things buildings.